Welcome, everybody, to another episode of After the Tassel podcast. Today, we have special guest Marissa Denehy from the Westminster class of 2008. She majored in business administration and minored in business finance. She also holds an MBA from the University of Missouri in St. Louis and a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional certificate from Cornell University. But she's also serving as our current president of the Alumni Council. We have an exciting alumni weekend coming up on the weekend of April 8th through the 9th. So I'm sure we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But Marissa, thank you for joining us today. And so we'll just get right to it. Tell us what you've been up to after the Tassel since you've graduated in 2008.
Hey, Michelle, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. I've never done a podcast before, so this will be really fun, I think. So you think, like many, I wasn't really 100% sure what I wanted to do after the Tassel. I had my business degree. I had worked for all 4 years when I was in college at Central Bank in Fulton as a teller there. And I really liked sort of the business world. I thought that career would serve me really well. And I had been promoted a couple of times within Central Bank and really enjoyed my time there. I had great leaders who were committed to my career growth and committed to making sure that I saw some success. But eventually I settled in St. Louis, kind of a long story short, that's where me and my husband live now. And I had started to work for Central Bank in St. Louis as well. Again, it's just a really great company, really phenomenal place to get my start. But I started to feel like I wanted to expand my network and sort of broaden my horizons and work for a larger company. So I think like many folks who were part of Blue Blazers and some of the other younger alums in St. Louis, I reached out to Brock Ayers. I think a lot of folks do that. And of course, he's a phenomenal advocate for Westminster alums, particularly those who are just getting started. And at the time, he was actually closer to my husband, who was a Delt class of 2010. And, I just asked him, like, how can I get on at Wells Fargo? I had applied a couple of times, hadn't really gotten any bites from that. And he passed along my resume to a recruiter, let them know who I was and, why they should take a look at what I had to offer. And sort of as the saying goes, the rest is history. I've been with Wells Fargo Advisors in St. Louis for 10 years. It'll actually be 10 years in August. And I currently serve as the manager program strategy lead, which sounds really fancy, but basically what that means is I onboard and train new managers. So these are the managers that oversee the operations and the business of financial advisors across the country. I also help to lead strategy, organize, execute national meetings for those managers within Wells Fargo Advisors and for the larger sort of wealth and investment management leadership team that sort of is the bucket above Wells Fargo Advisors. And I honestly play a large role in much of the leadership development initiatives taking place at the firm. So that's really where my passions lie. And it's been a really phenomenal experience.
Yeah, I mean, you said leadership and, a lot there, which I'm sure you got a lot of that experience here at Westminster because it's something that we're very proud of, something that we instill in our students. So what has been your proudest accomplishment since you've graduated? What have you been most proud of since you've graduated?
Yeah, one thing that Westminster really instilled in me, something that I don't think that I really had before coming to Westminster, was sort of this mindset of constant development and improvement. I always felt engaged. I knew I wanted to be successful at whatever I put my mind to, but Westminster is what really gave me the tools I needed. Helped me to develop myself into a better person, into a better ally for those who maybe haven't had the same privileges that I've been afforded. So after working for Wells Fargo for a couple of years, sort of growing through the ranks there, what I really decided was that I wanted to get my MBA. You had mentioned I got my MBA from the University of Missouri, St. Louis, but I needed to do that while still working full time. So I'm not a first generation college student, but I was the first one to get a graduate degree. So I'm really proud of that. But what I'll also plug here is I was able to do that leveraging the tuition reimbursement program that Wells Fargo provides. And what's great is a lot of programs offer this to their employees, full-time employees who are wanting to further their education. So for those listening, if you're interested in doing something like that, I certainly encourage you to take a look at what your company might have to offer. It's basically free money that you're leaving on the table. So definitely take a look at that. That's what allowed me to get my MBA, and I'm so grateful for it. I would definitely say that's my proudest accomplishment.
Yeah, and that's a conversation we have with students in our offices. James and I, James Kendall, is our internship coordinator, is, you might wait a year or two after you graduate to gain that work experience, but also getting on with the company. If you're considering a graduate degree or getting that MBA, you could have that tuition reimbursement and you wouldn't have to, pay out of pocket for that tuition. You would still have to pay the graduate school fees and your books and, all those lovely things, but the tuition is generally taken care of.
Yeah, and what else? I'm sorry to cut you off there, Michelle, but the other thing I would say is that if you waited a few years afterward, and every career is a little bit different from a business world perspective, if you wait a couple of years, get some of that experience in the business world, there's a little bit more context that you can apply to what you're learning in the MBA or the more advanced business degree. It's you just sort of connect more dots that way, in my experience. So that could be really valuable.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad to hear we're not giving poor advice to us.
It's great advice.
So it sounds like you had good success here in Fulton where you were a student and you were obviously very active, but how do you recommend students act the first year on the job? They're preparing, their junior, senior year before they graduate. And I know we recommend students really seek out a mentor that first year on the job. But what advice would you give a student who's getting ready to graduate?
And having a mentor is certainly great advice as well. But this is going to be kind of long because I kind of have 4 things that I would recommend, but it's all good stuff, I promise. So first, somebody who's there on the first year in their job, you really want to observe and take part in as many meetings as you can at first. So absorb what you can, but maybe more importantly on that piece, you want to be thinking about what you're hearing in those meetings and the information that you're taking in, how that fits into the larger firm strategy. So for me, I really had to figure that out for myself. But really, once I did, that's when I saw my career really starting to take off and getting more opportunities for growth and, getting the attention of some of those leaders. And you'd be amazed at how many people don't do this. They just sort of come in, put their head down, get their stuff done and leave. And that can be fine for some people. But if you're really wanting to set yourself apart, just having the experience of sitting in those meetings and then demonstrating that you understand how that fits into the larger strategy is really what's going to do that for you. So that's one. The second thing I would say is make sure that if you're given new opportunities, that you're jumping at them, that you're not turning them down. If somebody's giving you a new opportunity, whether that's a simple task or a larger project, that means that they know that you can handle it, or potentially maybe they're wanting to see how you do in action. So make sure that you're taking advantage of that opportunity and really give it your all, give it 100%, give it 110%, because chances are folks are watching that closely when it's something that's maybe outside of your normal job duties, and they're seeing how you do to see if you're maybe ready for that next level. So third, and this one is also very, very important, get out of your comfort zone. Don't be afraid to try new things. You don't grow if you're just sort of staying in your lane all the time. If you're just sort of doing what you're told and not really expanding beyond that, if you're not getting out of your comfort zone, you're really just not growing. So an example I want to give is, I think a lot of people are really, they get nervous around public speaking. So if they're given an opportunity to speak in public, whether that's to a small group of people or to run a meeting, or a larger group of people, maybe to give a seminar or a training class, I think a lot of folks balk at that and they sort of shy away from it because it's just not something that we all do naturally. Yeah. But take those opportunities. Like I was given those opportunities and I always took them, even when I didn't want to. And really, when it comes to public speaking, the trick to it is just being incredibly prepared and frankly, doing it as often as you can. Get up in front of people, do it. That's how you get better. And I think I would be lying if I said that those butterflies aren't always going to be there. They're always going to be there. You're always going to be nervous. when you're doing things for the first time. So whether you're, again, running a large meeting or a conference call or doing a podcast, the key is to figure out how to work through those butterflies rather than letting them overwhelm you and then shying away from those opportunities. So get out of your comfort zone. That's a huge piece. And then the fourth thing I'll say, and I think this is going to be a big hit with students, is set boundaries. You can have work-life balance and still move up in the company. So you still want to take the opportunities, like I mentioned before, but you also want to be really mindful of what your personal bandwidth is and making sure you're not stretching yourself too thin. Like if I find myself stretched too thin, I try to determine like what engagements I'm involved in and figure out what's filling up my cup the most, what do I get the most out of, and or what is helping me work toward my larger long-term goals. And I try to step back from the rest. If it's not accomplishing those two things, I try to move it off my plate so that I can really focus in on the things that are most important to me and most important to my career trajectory. So, and that's, by the way, the natural part, sort of the ebb and flow of life. That's part of adulting, so to speak.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to set those boundaries and, do what makes the most sense for you. And the other thing I would add here is, Michelle, is it's a little bit of a misnomer in corporate America that in order to move up, you have to work really long hours, crazy hours in the hopes of getting noticed. Frankly, you'll never get that time back. And the reality is that your boss likely isn't there observing you working these really long hours after everyone else has gone home. So why do it? All that's going to do is burn you out, and you're not actually going to be productive in those longer hours. So work smarter, not harder. Certainly work hard and do what you need to do and get done. But also make sure that you're giving yourself your own time. If you're taking vacation, take the time. You don't need to be checking your email at the beach. And that's something that I had to learn a little bit in my career too. I gave up PTO in the past. I worked on holidays and weekends, all sort of in this effort to try to get ahead. And ultimately, that's not what got me ahead. What got me ahead was understanding and observing many meetings and understanding how that fits into the strategy, taking advantage of new opportunities when given, and getting out of my comfort zone. That's how I was able to grow and develop. And then once I figured that out, I was able to set those boundaries and really make sure that work was work and home life was home life, and to leave it at that. So hopefully
go ahead.
Hopefully that helps.
Well, no, it helps tremendously, because I think students of this generation, Gen Z, they've seen their parents, the older Gen Xers, and, really burn the candle at both ends. And both parents have to work now, because Gen X grew up as latchkey kids. Both parents had to work, mom and dad. And so now this generation, I'm part of Gen X, we're now, moms, dads, both parents are working. So the millennials and Gen Z have really been observing us and saying, okay, is it worth it? We want work-life balance for ourselves, and, mental health is really at the top of everybody's minds these days for our college students in higher ed. And I love that you added that piece, because it's really crucial that we have that work-life balance and setting those boundaries. How do you advise a student, say in that first year or two, and a student, really, or a young professional is trying to get ahead and trying to burn those, or trying to, earn those promotions, and a boss keeps, or a supervisor keeps asking you to do these things outside of their bandwidth, and they know they want to say no, they need to say no. How would you recommend a student respond to that so that they're protecting their work-life balance?
I think the key to that is really just being open and honest and communicating. I found in my career that if I just sort of let it stew and let it do, and then I just, made myself run thin, I found that I wasn't doing the best work that I could do. But you also get into a situation that if you don't communicate that early, that you feel like it's too late to do that. Like, well, I've already committed to it, so I just got to see it through. And so it's just really important to be your own advocate and to make sure that you understand what your limits are and to ask for that help. I think the other thing is I feel like we've gotten into this mindset that you can't ask for help, or if you ask for help, that's some sort of weakness. To me, that's a strength. Like if you are running thin, you feel like you're not going to be able to do your best work, speak up, ask for that help. And chances are you're going to make a really great connection by being able to collaborate with somebody new as you work toward that goal. So it's really, communication is really a key there. And frankly, and this is just my personal opinion, that if you do communicate that and you get that pushback from your supervisor or your boss, consider moving on. I just feel like that's a really toxic way of burning yourself out, and you're going to find yourself in a really bad spot really quickly if you're not doing that.
Sure. Well, and that's a perfect segue to the next question is, how do you advise students to, or young professionals to themselves at work?
Yeah, so this is another area that I really had to figure out for myself. It's one of those things that these students have such amazing opportunities to hear from people who have sort of followed these paths before them. And so they should take advantage of that advice, because otherwise you're sort of left in the lurch. You're sort of figuring it out for yourself. But what I will say is that no one will advocate for you the way that you can advocate for yourself. And I'll say that again, just to reemphasize it. No one will be a bigger advocate for you than you. So I've worked for amazing people before, people I respected as people, people I learned a ton from. But what I found in the past was that I was getting disengaged or frustrated because I felt like they weren't advocating enough for me. I felt like I wasn't getting where I needed to go because they weren't advocating. And what I soon realized is that they have a lot on their plate. They have other people that they're trying to advocate for, and there's frankly just not enough time in the day to do it justice. So in terms of how I advocate for myself, I would say that first, I started connecting with leaders myself. I started getting over that sort of intimidation that you feel when talking to a senior leader who's got 30 years in the experience. They're people too. They have all the same, feelings and emotions and wants in life that the rest of us do. And frankly, a lot of them are super excited to share their knowledge and expertise with the next generation. So get out there and connect with folks yourself. Start making your own introductions to people that I felt would be good relationships for me. So maybe they have a value add to the work that I'm doing. Maybe they can provide me knowledge around different departments and how that plugs into the things that I'm doing. So getting out and making your own introductions to other people, so to other peers that maybe work in a different department. And finally, and this really sort of goes with the other two, is stop waiting for someone else to be your advocate. When I figured that out for myself, I realized I was going so much further, and I also found that I was really good at it. So I think you'll have a lot of people out there who probably consider themselves people persons. They consider themselves really good at chatting with other people and having conversation. And what I found was that was really my sweet spot, and that's where I really started connecting with people really well. And then I'll probably wrap up and just say that I would probably be remiss if I didn't also mention that sometimes you strike lightning, and sometimes you do find an amazing advocate who's willing to sort of take the next step for you or make introductions. I was lucky enough to have that in my current boss. So her name is Jen. She's amazing. She's a phenomenal advocate for her employees, and she's really helped me to grow and learn along the way. And you definitely need to recognize that when you have it and take advantage of that. But at the end of the day, that's not always going to be guaranteed. So you have to make sure that you're standing up for yourself in a professional way. And it's just so important to be your own advocate.
I totally agree. So we talked, about setting boundaries earlier in the podcast, but what does work-life balance mean to you? How do you manage it in your life?
Yeah, for me, work-life balance is not letting your work become your whole identity. I mean, that becomes lonely really quickly. It becomes toxic very quickly. I'm not saying that you can't, for example, if you're an entrepreneur, or you work for a small business, or let's say you're a financial advisor where you really kind of have that entrepreneurial mindset. I'm not saying that can't, still be a big part of your life, but having set boundaries on this is work and this is life. And when I'm at work, I'm giving all of my attention to work. within reason. And when I'm at home, I'm giving all of my attention to my home life and focusing on myself and focusing on my family. And again, taking advantage of the time off that you get, really focus on that, focus on making yourself a better person during that time, doing things that you enjoy that's outside of your work. And again, setting those boundaries with your team members. My team members know that if I'm on PTO, if I'm on vacation, they make sure that they're covering in my absence. And the other thing is I reciprocate that. I make sure that I'm doing the same for them so that when they're away from the office, they don't have to feel like something's getting missed or falling through the cracks. They know I've got it. And you have to demonstrate that. And you have to really be a team player in that regard. But that's really what it means to me, is making sure that you have those solid boundaries, that you abide by them. And that's really important too, because I know people that they've got their work email on their phone. And so if a notification comes in, they feel compelled to like jump in. I turn all my notifications off on my phone. So that way that I'm only focusing on those emails during work hours, and I'm not worrying about them at all. There's literally nothing that can't wait until tomorrow or until Monday or whatever it might be.
Sure. Yeah, I totally agree. And I advocate for work-life balance a lot with my students. In fact, I tell them, I'm not working after 5 o'clock most generally, because I'm married and I have a daughter at home. I want to go home to them. I have limited hours in the evening. So, and that's my stress, going home to my family. So
absolutely.
Thank you for advocating for that. As far as your tips for our students who are in internships now, or they're seeking out summer internships or their first job after graduation, what are your tips on being successful in those areas?
Yeah, I think to be successful in an internship or, a summer internship or an apprenticeship is not really that much different than the first year in the workforce. It's very similar. You're trying to learn, you're trying to take in as much as you can. It's really important that you be open to new experiences and you take advantage of new experiences, and frankly, be able to spin those experiences into the larger narrative of your accomplishments, so that whenever you are potentially looking for that next step in your career, or you're interviewing for the next role, that you can be able to demonstrate how that experience helped to shape you and how it applies to the next step. I'll also say, don't be too big for your britches. I've worked with some interns. They felt that they were above some of the work that they were getting. If you think you're getting something too easy, go and do it and nail it, and then ask for what's next. Don't expect that the folks that you're working with, your boss or your team members, are simply going to give you things to do. Make sure that you're asking for things to do and that you're staying busy. Everyone is moving a mile a minute in corporate America. Everybody's got a full plate. And so don't always think of things as not big enough for you, that it's too small, or it's too administrative, or that you're above it. Just don't do that. And be open to asking questions and asking for help and seeking clarifications. A funny story is, we had an intern a few years ago, and she was given the task of inventorying the supply closet. So it's where we kept our pens and booklets and brochures and notebooks and things like that. But we needed to do an inventory to see if we needed to order more supplies. And, she just, for some reason, had this feeling like she couldn't ask questions once given a task. Like she felt like she was just supposed to know everything. And again, folks are moving a mile a minute. They're not always explaining things, or they think you have it unless you're asking. And she just didn't ask. And when she came back a few hours later, she had physically stood in the door and then drawn a picture of the supply closet, like drew the shelves and drew the pens and the notebooks stacked on the shelves. So it wasn't like an inventory of like, we have 100 pens, we have 24 notebooks. Like, it wasn't what an inventory, it was just a picture. And of course that didn't help anybody. And it's just it's such a simple thing that if she had just asked for some more clarification, she would have been able to nail that. And we would have been, it seems like such a small task, but it was something that everybody does administrative stuff. So it was just such a weird situation where she would have just clarified, she would have had a much better outcome. So make sure you're asking questions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. You'd be amazed.
So you you talked a lot about, seeking out mentorships and talking a lot about your current mentor, Jen, there at Wells Fargo. And I know a lot of probably what you're going to say about this next question is paying it forward, but as the president of the current Alumni Council, what experiences at Westminster or life after the Tassel led you to want to give back as an alma mater and become more engaged as an alum?
This is a loaded question for me, Michelle. I tend to get really cheesy and in some cases tear up when I think about this, but what it ultimately comes down to is I love Westminster, like period. I love Westminster. I love the people that I've interacted with there. They've always made me feel special. As a student, I didn't just feel like a number. The professors and the administration knew who I was. They knew what I was engaged in. They knew what I was interested in. They would give me book recommendations, so it just felt very personal to me. I also met an amazing group of friends there, people who I consider almost an extension of my family. Most of them I'm still pretty close to today. I met my husband at Westminster. He's adult, class of 2010. His brother, Adam Kloppy, was an alumni, class of 2006. He married my roommate from college, Katie Pilgrim Kloppy. We were roommates all 4 years. Yeah, it's super weird. We spend Christmases together, so that's really weird. But Katie was also my sorority sister, so we were both thetas. And there's just a lot of connections to the school in my personal life, in addition to the work that I do for the school. And that's just really helped me shape my life. So, the other thing is I grew up in a small town. I didn't really have a network to speak of. My mom worked retail, my dad worked sort of in a factory type of position, and it just wasn't sort of the same environment as the type of career that I have today. They were always very supportive of me and my siblings and allowing us to sort of find our own path. And, when I started looking into Westminster, I just saw something really special, and it's just really paid off. I've built my network from Westminster contacts. I was able to take part in clubs and organizations. And that honestly allowed me to take on leadership positions as early as my freshman year. And that honestly, I use a lot of those leadership tools today. And I'm just not sure that that's an experience you get at larger schools. You don't always get those opportunities to take on leadership roles so early on. The other thing is I was able to get scholarships through Westminster that I found out later. I don't know that I really knew it at the time, but certainly found out later, and with my work on the Alumni Council, that those scholarships were funded by Westminster alumni. And honestly, that's what allowed me to stay at Westminster and finish my degree there and be there all 4 years. So I really just want to be able to give that back to the next generation of students. It means a lot to me to be able to do that, to pay it forward in that way. For me, Westminster was my home away from home for a long time. I don't know how any of our current students might feel, but I know I still get a little bit of a jolt of excitement. Like if I'm coming down that 4th Street hill off of Highway 54 and you just sort of catch that first glimpse of the campus, like I still sort of get excited, like I'm coming home a little bit. So the school just really means a whole lot to me.
That's amazing. That's really amazing. And really what a lot of our alums have been saying, this whole time is how it felt home to them. The first moment they stepped on campus as a high school senior, they got that one-on-one support from their professors. They found so many deep and lasting friendships on campus. So I'm glad you had such a positive experience here, and you're here with us today. You're giving back again by sharing your time with us on this podcast, and helping our students gain some information from all of this really great professional advice you've given us. So thank you again for sharing your time with us today. I know students, those of you that are going to be participating in Alumni Weekend, can go to our website for more information. Thank you again, Marissa, for joining us today.
Having me.
Yeah, you are absolutely welcome. And we'll see you on Alumni Weekend, April 8th and 9th.